Video file formats can be confusing. I get it. I mean, sometimes it's like an alphabet soup with a bunch of letters and numbers, and you don't know what it all means. So I want to do sort of a vocabulary lesson and try to demystify or decode some of that alphabet soup. Because I really think if you, it looks like something you have to memorize or something like that, but it's actually not. It's a fairly simple system of codes. And once you sort of understand better what they're getting at, it's easier to sort of decode the whole thing. So let me show you. Okay, the first part of this is just some vocabulary. First, this word codec. It's short for code decode. It's a neologism. And when you hear people talk about a codec, they're talking about the actual algorithm that encodes the video. It's like the guts of the thing, right? It's the actual code, the way it's encoded. So these are things like H.264, H.265, and ProRes. These are names of codecs, ways of encoding. And then you have a wrapper, which is sometimes also called a format or a file type. This is more things like MP4, QuickTime, or the MOV file, AVI, AVCHD. And the idea of a wrapper is it's the package that the codec goes in, right? Often designated by the extension, .mov, .mp4. This gets a little tricky because MP4 is actually like a standard. Okay, so it's a file type and sort of a family of codecs. H.264 and H.265 are both MP4 codecs. And you can actually have an MP4 codec inside an MOV wrapper. Okay, so you have to be a little agile in your thinking about this, but these are the principles involved. Oh, by the way, that AVC HD that we're seeing less of, that was a wrapper for the camera that put all of the video that you shot inside one big file, and it was kind of difficult to deal with. So we try to stay away from that one. Resolution, you're probably used to. This is just the height and width as measured in pixels. So just as a visual aid, looks something like that. It's your grandma's old TV, standard definition. Sort of the first generation of high def and the first generation of high def video was 720. We still see that on our phones a lot, on social media platforms. High definition, that's most of our TVs, and then the big 4K or Ultra HD. Probably no surprises here. I think people are used to this because these numbers pop up on the YouTube drop downs, and like for a consumer, I think we're used to these now, 480, 720. Here's just a little more on this, kind of what it's called, what you might see it as, and then what the actual resolution is. And then we'll talk about this in a little, but what they're saying here is how much data per 1 minute, or a data rate. Oh yeah, data rate. So that's just talking about this in terms of how much digital content, how many ones and zeros, bits and bytes it takes over a given second or minute, as they had it there. Okay, so megabytes per second is often how that's measured. Frame rate is the frames per second, right? In the sense of film running through a camera with separate frames. Traditional film was 24 frames per second. Television in the United States is 29.97. I'm not going to do it here, but there is a reason that this is not just 30, and we also see 23.27, I think. Why is it not just 24? There's a reason. I'll just float it out there. If anyone wants to ask me in class what that reason is, it's a bit of a doozy, but I can explain it if you want. And then there's this idea of the I and the P, progressive versus interlaced. It's a little hard to explain. This is the best visual I could find, but progressive video that we see more and more of is literally like the film, right? A full capture of all the pixels, and then the next one at 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second, whatever it happens to be. Whereas interlacing, this is like how original TVs worked. It was like rows, and it updated them one by one. That's how it made the image. And so the image was broken up into these interlaced halves, interwoven halves. And so sometimes you see certain types that you actually see little remnants of it if something's been transferred poorly from interlaced to progressive. But that's what they're talking about, interlaced versus actual progressive image. Okay, so then when you see something like this in the camera, hopefully you can decode it. What that's saying is it is at the 4K Ultra HD resolution, right? The 2160, the highest number. And then that's the frame rate. Again, it's a weird number, not 24. I can explain if you want me to, but that's just the frame rate. It's that many frames per second. And this is actually the name of the codec. HEVC, and a long GOP or group of pictures. That's actually saying the name of the algorithm using to do the encoding, and then that's the data rate, 150 megs per second, I believe, on those cameras. So I hope that's helpful, both thinking about the camera settings, but also on the other end, exporting at the other end in Premiere Pro and how you choose those formats. It does look like alphabet soup. It can be intimidating, but it's not actually that complicated.